All right, guys, in the build show today, I got a special one for you. We're going long, so buckle up. I'm going to tell you the full story on my house under construction. We're going to get into some nerdy building science, talking about how you could build a house that would actually last 500 years. And we're going to talk a little bit about a passive house certification. We get some really interesting stuff. Now, we're actually filming this build show for my local chapter of the American Institute of Architects, and I have my architect with me. So this is going to be kind of a different episode. The original intended audience here is really architects in Austin, Texas, where I work, but I thought you guys would enjoy this too. Today's build show, all about my house. Let's get going. I've got with me the architect in the project. You all know Kit Johnson, Christopher Kit Johnson Architects.
Howdy.
Kit, thanks for joining me, man. I appreciate it. Why don't you throw that mask in your pocket so it's not hanging off all day?
It's not attractive?
We're going to keep our distance as we're talking. So the purpose of today's meeting is, of course, to give you a tour of the house. But this is a kind of a special and unique house. This is actually my family's personal home, but it didn't start that way. We've kind of evolved a little bit. We also have some pretty unique building science details going on here. We followed Joe Lstiburek's perfect wall concept on this house. And as kind of a result of really going for a super efficient build, we've realized that it would be wise to pursue passive house certification. So on this video, we're going to give you a tour. We're going to talk to you about the project. We're going to talk to you about perfect wall and kind of teach you some of those concepts from Joe Lstiburek at Building Science Corporation. And we're going to talk a little bit about Passive House Institute US, how this house fits, and why you might consider doing your projects in the future to that standard. But first, Kit, why don't you give us, for those of you who don't know anything about the project, give them kind of an intro on how we met and how we got started on this project.
Well, Matt, I don't know if you remember this, but it was actually at one of these CRAN meetings.
That's right,
This is pre-COVID-19, but
yeah.
You know, we were just chatting and you said, you know, hey, I bought the house right across the street. You know, I'm thinking about kind of just experimenting with it. Would you be interested in kind of working out a few details for me? I'm just thinking spruce it up. You know, I'm not gonna put a lot of money into it.
Like
I just
50
kind of,
grand.
yeah, it was really low. And yeah, I said, yeah, sure, that'd be kind of interesting. I like some of the details that you do on your houses. And so I thought,
just
wow,
another reason why builders and architects need to mingle at CRAN meetings,
yes.
right? Develop
Marketing
those
is good.
relationships.
Yeah.
Get your marketing down.
Yeah.
It's good stuff, Kit.
So it's amazing to think that's where we started.
Yeah.
And what we're about to walk through today.
So a little background on the project. We're a 1970s neighborhood. I've actually lived basically right across the street for the last 13, 14 years. I know this neighborhood. I love it. This was a house that was owned by a neighbor who had been divorced and was getting ready to retire. The house was in terrible, really pretty dilapidated shape. But when I approached Kit, I said, you know, let's do a smallish remodel. I want to spend maybe 50 grand. I want to turn this into a nice project, but I don't want to go over the top. I think it'll be a family rental house, that sort of thing. Maybe my parents would come back and spend a month or two in the winter because they live back east. As that developed, the more and more we talked about it with my wife and I, we said, you know, this would be awesome. Why don't we move into this house? So then it was a bigger remodel. Let's transition a little bit with that as the background, hiring Kit and saying it's a small remodel. If you guys haven't seen my videos, I do videos on all kinds of different things, but I really focus on efficiency and durability, how to build a better house. I've really tried to focus on building a better house each time I build. So for years now, I've researched all these different methods for building. I've seen all kinds of different building products. But the one concept that I always come back to that I think is really an interesting concept and can radically change the way we build in America is Joe Lstiburek's perfect wall concept. I'll put a link out so you guys can see that. It's just a couple page paper I read maybe 10 years ago, and it's taken me years to kind of understand it fully. We did a house a couple years ago with Rouser Architecture where we used those principles and it got on the cover of Fine Home Building. And so I wanted to use those principles, but do it in a way that would be maybe a little bit more of a family house oriented way, a more normal looking house. And Kit, with that as the background, why don't you tell us a little bit about the kind of architecture you're seeing here today, how it fits within the neighborhood, how people are going to perceive the house when it's all done.
Yeah, I mean, well, you know, from the outset, it started off just to be a little spruce up. You know, definitely we're in a 1970s neighborhood, kind of low slung, mostly single stories, certainly nothing higher than a 2-story house, none of the tower houses you see in central Austin. So we wanted to keep up with that Didn't want to be the obnoxious architectural house in the neighborhood. These are all Matt's friends and neighbors, and he loves them, and he doesn't want to be that guy.
Yep.
And so he came to me and he's like, okay, how do we spruce this up? So the initial ideas when we first looked at it were just some little doodads, and you can go back and see the early episodes of this. And so we haven't lost track of that. We've wanted to still, spruce it up, but without, trying to make it garish and obnoxious in the neighborhood. So with that, we've really kept the same massing. Now, one thing we did was we raised the pitch on the 2-story volume, and then we actually lowered the pitch on the single story, and that's where we have our pop-up, and that's kind of the pizzazz.
Yeah.
And we'll see that when we walk around the house. But for the most part, it still says quiet, it stays quiet.
Pretty subdued house.
Yeah.
And I wanted it to really fit within the neighborhood. So then with that as the background, let's go back to the perfect wall concept. Joe Lstiburek has this paper about perfect wall where he says, we could probably build a house out of standard materials, things like 2x4s and standard construction, but that house could last 500 years. And when I read that, I thought, this is a concept we're not used to in America. I've been to England before, and I stayed in an English cottage that was built in the 1300s. And growing up in the East Coast, I'm used to seeing houses that were 100, maybe 150, 200 years old. But 500, that's crazy. That's really super rare. And obviously our country's not that old. But in Europe, that's pretty typical. It's pretty common to see houses that are 100, 200, 300 years old. So how do we do that? We're talking about wood. Wood is an incredible building material. God's designed something that grows, that's sustainable, that sequesters carbon, that's easy for us as carpenters to build with. But what does wood need to be lasting and durable? It needs to be dry, right? Your dining room table that you got 20 years ago is still in great shape, right? It's in your dining room. It's in the air-conditioned envelope of your house. It's not getting wet. If you spilled some water on it accidentally, you wipe it up and it dries and it's fine. What if we treated our houses the same way as we did our dining room tables? What if we put all of our control layers on the outside in a way that would control, what are the control layers, by the way? We've got heat, air, vapor, and thermal, right? We've got, let's start with water, number one, liquid water. Our houses need to control water. If water gets in on a modern house with insulation and with modern codes, it's not gonna be able to dry. Houses that were built 100 years ago with no insulation, when we remodel those houses, there's still some of those in Austin, they got wet, they dried, they got wet and dried, no problem. A modern house built to today's standards, if it gets wet, it's not gonna dry. The next thing we need to control is vapor. We need that vapor control on houses. We'll come back to that in a second. Air control is also vitally important because when air flows through houses, through leaks, through cracks, it brings with it moisture. And in our Texas climate in particular, where it's hot and humid outside, it's not super hot right now, it's probably 70s, but it's real humid, I'm sweating. And if you were to bring a cold glass of water outside, you would see sweat gathering on that. When air leaks in, it's bringing moisture with it that can condense in our houses, and that's gonna cause problems. And then the last control layer for our houses is thermal. That's our insulation layer. What's the best place for that insulation? Should we be stuffing that in between our stud cavities? Or should we put a bunch of that insulation on the outside of the house? And this is kind of the genesis of Perfect Wall. I'd highly encourage you to read the paper. But we're using a lot of those concepts where we've got continuous control layers from the foundation, from the slab of this house, all the way up to the peak of the roof, continuous without any breaks. And that's really what we're going to show here. Now let's walk up to the house kit and we can talk about a couple of those layers. I do want to say that we had another architect involved in this project as well, an out-of-town architect, a friend of mine named Steve Basic, who's based out of Boston. Steve did an incredible job of working with Kit and I. Kit did the heavy lifting on the architecture and the permits and the floor plan, really all the details for the siding and all that sort of thing. But all these details that are kind of behind the scenes and hidden, this is where Steve helped me out tremendously and did a great job, didn't he, Kit?
He's fantastic. He's a big brother.
He's a big brother, that's right. So what you're seeing here is we've got 2 inches of exterior insulation. You could use all kinds of different products, and I have over the years. I ended up using foil-faced polyiso on the outside of the house. This is 2 inches. And what you're seeing on the outside of the house is that it's running from the foundation all the way to the peak of the house. And it's a little hard to tell here, but if you look at the side of the house, you can start to get a feel for what's happened here. See how there's 2 layers on the roof right there? And then you've got these 2x4s right here that are kind of above the insulation. What we did was we framed this house with a term that I just pulled out of the hair called monopoly framing. In other words, when we framed the house first, we framed it without any overhangs. The green Huber zip sheathing you're seeing on here goes straight up the wall and then transitions right to the roof. We cut the rafters at the wall line and ran the sheathing up, and so there was no overhangs. It looked like a very modern monopoly house, let's say. The idea was then we could run our wall insulation all the way up without a break and then transition to the roof. And you can kind of see that here. See, we've framed a flat soffit right here, but we framed it after the insulation. And this happens to be our kind of garage edition, but if you pop in over here, you can see what's happening in the garage, where these rafters in the garage were framed after the wall insulation was put on. So we framed the walls. This floor joists were here. We framed the walls on top, just traditional platform framing. And then we bolted on that ledger you see right there. That's a, I don't know, a 2x8 or 2x10 LVL ledger. And we bolted that on with some real long bolts. Those are Spax power lags, basically a modern lag screw. That's lagged all the way through the foam back into the LVL beam that's back there. So now even this roof isn't breaking my thermal layer. And as we walk around to the front door, you can see the same thing happening here for this porch roof. The frame carpenters put all that insulation up and then framed the roof on top of that. So all the overhangs happen in the same manner here, including the overhangs from the main house. So if we look up here, you can see we've got these 2x4 LVLs that are sticking out as rafter tails. Those aren't the rafters to the roof. Those are a fake tail. Now, of course, those are going to be hidden. We're going to use some James Hardie products on the outside to get a mixture of both brick and Hardie plank on the outside of the house. But those are giving the structure so we can make an over roof. I've found over the years all the rot, all the mold, all the problems with houses typically happens in the lower section of the house. You know, those gutters got removed or got overflowed. The water runs off the roof, it splashes back. And so we're really taking care and attention for that bottom 1 to 2 feet. But that umbrella over the house, that big overhang, I've got a 2-foot overhang basically everywhere in the whole house, is giving us a huge measure of extra durability. It's also giving us a little bit of a sun umbrella, right? Texans 100 years ago wore big cowboy hats. And the big cowboy hats served a purpose even in the hot days to keep the sun's rays off of us. So having a cowboy hat on your house makes a lot of sense in our Texas climate. Kit, let's transition to you. We talked about perfect wall a little bit. Yep. That's that concept of those continuous control layers all the way from the foundation to the ridge. Let's meet you inside and we'll talk floor plan.
All right, so Matt's been talking a lot about the details, you know, Lstiburek's perfect wall house and all that, which is all good, but it might be good just to reverse a little bit, just to talk about the big ideas. This is our architect audience. So, you know, with the house, once Matt decided, like, you know what, we're not just going to spruce up the outside, we're going to really tackle this thing and we're going to do it right. And so, in getting into it, you know, some of the big driving ideas were light, just bring in a bunch more light. This is typical 1970s house. You've got all the light on one side of the house and it's totally not balanced by any other openings in the house. So that was a huge driving idea. Another idea was like more space, just clean it up. You know, before when Matt purchased it, there was a huge stairway here. The kitchen was tucked all the way back over here on the west side of the house, and then we had our living room over here. So one thing that came out real clear in the early design process was like, hey, can we just get rid of that stair? Because that's the thing that's messing everything up. Because we were talking about ideas about like, how do you look around the stair and connect the kitchen to the great room. So we got rid of the stair. The stair is going to be finished out over here against this wall, and we'll go into that in a second. But that completely changed everything. Another thing that changed everything up was Matt, again, tried to stick with, you know, work with what he had, the bones with what he had, but it didn't take him long. I mean, gosh, he had just gotten into demolition when, you know, just looked at all the mold and water damage. And Matt made the calls like, hey, I'm just tearing it down to the slab. So everything came all the way down to the slab. So we have these beautiful LVL studs in here, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah. Huge donation, by the way. I got a bunch of that donated. It's such an amazing position I'm in that people are wanting to give me some things for my house. Not everybody gets that, I admit.
But beautiful. I've never like salivated over studs before. Beautiful studs.
But going to 9 foot, right? Yeah. Wasn't that huge?
Huge. I mean, it's amazing that 1 foot. I mean, you know, again, typical 1970s house. We got that 8-foot ceiling. It wasn't so bad when the house was chopped up so much, but you know, now that we've opened it up, and the kitchen was what was a big scare. Once we, you know, got all this opened up and we looked at what the kitchen was at 8 feet, man, this is a pancake house. You know, it's terrible. So raise it up to 9 feet made all the difference.
And if I could pop in there real quick, I haven't talked about passive house yet. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But one of the driving factors on that height for me was I really, over the years, have wanted to do slab insulation. The first time I ever did it actually was on Scott Ginder's house, if you know him from Forgecraft. Scott and I built a house together for his personal family, I don't know, 7, 8 years ago. We built some really high performance things, and that was my first insulated slab edge, where we insulated the outside of the slab. The details were hard on that. It wasn't easy to get an insulated slab, but I see the benefit of it because this slab in the wintertime draws a lot of heat out of the building. So in working with Steve Basic, Steve has a detail that I'd seen before in the Northeast where they basically pour a standard slab and then you insulate on top of the slab and then add new subfloor. And that's what we're going to be doing here. I'm going to add 1.5 inches of rigid insulation on top of this existing 1970 slab. I'm so thankful that I'm basically on rock out here. The slab hasn't changed at all since it was poured in the 70s. So we're going to add 1.5 inches of insulation. And then on top of that, I'm going to do a floating subfloor detail. We're going to use 3/4 inch Huber Advantex subfloor. We're going to do 2 layers that are glued and screwed together that's going to float over top of that. Sounds crazy, but it actually works. I've been in houses like this in Boston. I've been built with that method. So that now I don't have any weirdo details. There's no termite issues, none of that. All I have to do is put that insulation down and put that subfloor on top. Now I've got this huge thermal break on top of my slab. Big, big deal. Now basically my house has insulation on the bottom, up the sides, and all the way up the roof, continuous. We're going to talk about passive house in a minute, but that extra 3 inches on top of the slab made a big difference in my ceiling height decision and ultimately deciding to tear the house down and start new. There just wasn't enough salvage value, and there was so much rat issues and rot and mold and all kinds of stuff on this 70s house that it made it. Kit, talk to me about what you did in terms of changing this layout to work with my family, and also talk to me a little bit about the second floor, and then we can walk up there.
Yeah, so, well, just back down here, the whole big idea of more light. And so once we open this up, the other thing we did was also open up the front here. And so now we've literally got, it's glazed in, but it's essentially a dog trot house, aesthetically at least. It's letting the light through. So we've got that, that's opened it up, and now our light's, you know, much more balanced. We got the big kitchen, you know, Matt's got 4 kids. They're all growing, eating a lot. Big family kitchen now that we've got. We've actually we took a little bit of space from the garage and so made the kitchen really sized for a modern kitchen. Yep. And so that was a big change. But the big thing here is just got rid of a lot of the rooms, and now we have the great room with, now the backdrop is either you're looking out onto the backyard or we've got this beautiful stair that's going to be coming in here. This will be fully detailed out. And then what we're going to do is we're going to tuck away, you know, they do a lot of homeschooling, and so we've got little pockets all around the house for the kids to study. And so underneath the stair here, we're going to have, you know, a hidden door that's going to hide a little work area underneath the stair. But this will be a beautiful backdrop to the great room here.
Yeah, and we're going to use a fair amount of wood on the inside too. Kit and I are working with Kim Truss on the interior design, and we've got a plan for some wood ceilings in here. And then some wood along this wall and some wood into the pop-up, which, by the way, have we talked, you mentioned that earlier. Talk to me about this pop-up, Kit, because everyone who comes in here mentions that, and I love this detail.
Well, the pop-up makes it. You know, it came from necessity. When we moved the stair from over there to here, we had to do something to be able to provide the head height to give us the space to get up there. But when you're doing that, it's just an opportunity to bring some light in. And so rather than have, you know, more skylights, you know, we've got the 6 windows up here that are letting light in. We've got it on both sides, and essentially it's just this big light well that's going to completely light up the interior here, bounces off the white wall, and the great room now has all the light that Christy wanted. That's what I heard from the very beginning, was like, more light, more light. Every time I talked to Christy, it was more light. And so this is definitely going to bring all the light that she's looking for.
Yeah, it's been awesome.
Yeah.
Before we transition to the upstairs kit, let me talk a little bit about this wall over here, because you can see the back side of the sheathing here. This is zip system sheathing we use on the outside, which is that green or brown system that uses tape on the outside. I've used a lot of different systems over the years, but one of the benefits of zip system and all the peel and sticks that you've seen me use is that you not only get really good waterproofing, but you get really good air tightness. And we're going to talk about passive house in a minute, but regardless of whether you're going for a passive house rating, having a very airtight house is critical, especially for us in Texas. We need to take control of the airflow and not let our houses breathe. Everyone always comments on my YouTube videos when I talk about airtightness. Oh, these houses are too tight. You're going to kill people. They need to breathe. No, you and I need to breathe. Our houses need to be tight. If we don't build a tight house, if air can leak in under the bottom plates, around windows, around outlets and doors and that sort of thing, when that air leaks in, especially in Texas, it's bringing pollen. I don't know about you, but I have cedar fever and cedar allergies. It's bringing all the mold that's in the air, and a lot of days the mold count in Texas is crazy high. It's also bringing humidity in the house, and regardless of that, it's bringing the outside temperature in, and we're spending money to air condition our houses or to heat our houses. We don't want that air to come in just anytime the wind blows. We want to get the tightest envelope we possibly can, and then we want to install a fresh air system that will bring air in, funny timing with the wind blowing, to bring air in on our terms when we want it to come in, right? I didn't want that air to blow in right then, but I need a continuous puff of fresh, filtered, dehumidified air in my Texas home. You need that wherever you are in the world, whether you're in Minnesota or whether you're in the tip of the Florida Keys. We want that air to come in on our terms. So what we did with that Monopoly framing was we framed the house with these walls that went right into the roof line. We taped everything with zip system sheathing tape. That's that tape that goes on there. And then we did some really good air sealing details where the bottom plate hit the concrete and also where the sheathing hit the concrete on the outside. So we've got a very tight envelope on the outside of the house. Now we could have done that, as I said, with a peel and stick product. I've used a lot of Polywall's Alumaflash. That's a great waterproofing and air sealing product for the South. I've also used a lot of the Casella Dorkin products, which are German products. Those are very vapor permeable, and those work great too. They're also very airtight. This is a product that I thought was an interesting choice too. We decided, because this wall is between my garage and my house, I was only going to be able to put batt insulation in here, and the whole rest of the house, as you saw, has R13 continuous insulation. At my garage, I was trying to figure out, how do I get air tightness, and I want a thermal break. I want some insulation there. So I ended up doing this 1.5" R system sheathing. This is R6.6, so it's about half of what my other walls are, but it's going to be pretty temperate in that garage compared to the outside walls. And I sheathed that again with that same zip system sheathing so I could tape it all. And then we're going to do some tape details between this and the concrete slab. And then we'll also have to air seal with some more zip system sheathing that ceiling line in my garage later, so that my house stops here and my garage is thoroughly sealed off. Another big thing that's really important detail-wise as we're talking about air tightness is anywhere we penetrate this envelope. For instance, see how my wall stops right there and then I've got these joists that continue on? I block those joists off ahead of time before my mechanicals start, and it's critical to tell your HVAC guy, your plumber, and your electrician, for every hole you drill, you can only put one thing in that hole. One wire, one pipe, one whatever, if it's going to the outside of my envelope. So where my pipes penetrate here, I don't want one big hole with several pipes going through. I just want one small hole with one pipe going through so that I can detail that for air tightness. I'll probably end up coming back and using some spray foam in this one particular spot. That's a very tricky spot, but I don't need to rely on spray foam really anywhere else for the house for air tightness. All my air tightness is on the outside. Now I mentioned earlier that perfect wall concept. In the past, that house that I did a few years ago with Eric Rouser, we did nothing but outside insulation. On this house, I'm doing a mix. I wanted this to be a little more kind of normal, so to speak. So we did 2 inches in the walls, 4 inches in the roof. My walls on the outside are about R13, and we're a little shy of R26 on the roof. And then on the walls, I'll be able to come in and use batt insulation. I'll probably use rock wool, kind of like what you're seeing in the ceiling line here. on these walls because I don't need to worry about air tightness. I don't need spray foam for some air tightness benefit. And over the years, when I've done nothing but spray foamed houses, I'm always a little bit disappointed with the blower door results. So what we're doing here is we're not relying on any of that. What we're doing is sealing everything on the outside. Kid, anything I missed as I was talking about some of those details?
No, I mean, I think you got it. I think it's just good for the audience to hear. I mean, it's just really thinking those through. And it's not just from what you need to tell your subs about, penetrations through the wall.
Yep.
I mean, it's getting in, the head of the architect and the architect's staff. I mean, like, hey, you need to be thinking about this clear delineator between inside and outside. Not just outside environment, but I mean, looking at your garage as an outdoor environment too, with all its, pollutants.
Before we go upstairs, let me transition for just a second and let me talk to you for a second about passive house principles. I'm certainly not an expert. I'm not a certified passive house builder yet. I will be taking those classes. But this is an interesting concept that I've not really talked a whole lot about on the channel, even though I've visited several certified houses and been to several houses under construction that were pursuing certification. So passive house, if I could boil it down, and I'm looking at notes, sorry about that, it's basically utilizing a set of design principles to attain a very quantifiable, meaning we can say we can calculate the numbers, but also a very rigorous and testable level of energy efficiency, meaning thermal efficiency, and also air tightness for a house. And these are my words, not Passive House Institute, but so it could passively survive. I kind of think of this as a standard which originally started in Germany in the 1980s, where we've got a very cold climate. We've got maybe a grid system that could go down. If you're in a climate that's 10 degrees outside and the power goes off, if you have a traditional house that's leaky and not very well insulated, how long is it going to take to get uncomfortable and maybe even have some people not be able to be in their homes anymore? What about pipes bursting, all these things? On the other hand, if you build a super well insulated and super airtight house, if the power went out and you were minus 10 out, because your body's generating some heat, you could probably live in a house if it was built well enough for several days without power and be okay. Now let's translate that now to America. Passive House Institute US, FIAS. We've kind of adopted our own standards here in America. And we've said, our climate isn't just Germany's climate, right? We've got Minnesota and Florida all in the same country. Texas, a very different climate zone than Germany. A couple years ago, they've kind of modified those standards a little bit. And now we actually have a climate zone version of Passive House, which means that I can build a slightly different house with slightly different standards in Texas than I am if I'm going to get a certified house in Boston or some other place. Now, when we think about passive house, we think very high levels of insulation, very airtight, in fact, a blower door score that's crazy low. We also have some components that are a part of that need to be really good components, and windows is a big part of that. Now, when I started this project, I wasn't thinking I was going to be passive house. In fact, I spec'd all double glazed, windows and doors that would meet code, but weren't crazy expensive, nor were they crazy well insulated. I'm working with JELD-WEN on this house, and when I made some of the changes with Kit from the remodel to a new build, we upgraded some of the windows in the house, not all of them, to triple glaze, and I got at that point a passive house energy modeler involved who modeled the house and said, actually, if we have a mixture of double and triple glaze on the house, and we switch out this front and back door to a more efficient unit than just a standard double glaze, I think you're actually going to make passive house standard. This was the first kind of aha moment that I said, gosh, I should pursue that certification if for no other reason than I want to teach people how to build really good houses. And I want to encourage us as Americans, us as Texans, to build better and to build buildings that are going to last like we have in other parts of the world. I think we have had a tendency to build buildings that are related to the first cost and yet get torn down and aren't particularly efficient or comfortable or durable in the short lifespan that they have. So this house is intended to be a little bit of a model for that. I'll put a link to this in the description, but they've changed with this climate-specific Passive House Institute US some of those standards so that, for instance, in climate zone 2 where we are here, I need a mixture of windows, double and triple glaze, that are going to end up with an overall U factor of 0.18. Now code in our area is somewhere around 0.32, I believe, for U factor. So I can have some double glaze windows. I'm also going to need some triple glaze in some very efficient units. And for solar heat gain coefficient, as long as we're below 0.3, we're going to make their standards. What else did I miss? I think that's it on passive house for now. There's so much more that could be said. But the idea of passive house is super well insulated, super airtight, and then we're going to bring fresh filtered air in on our terms. And here in the South, we're going to use an ERV, an energy recovery ventilator, so that we can also exchange some of that moisture. We're going to use a dehumidifier in this house. I've been working with my friends at Positive Energy. If you're here in Austin, you know them. Great mechanical designers. They've done a fantastic design for me. I'm going to be using all Mitsubishi equipment. We've got very small equipment. I don't have a lot of load on this house. And then we're going to use a Zender unit for fresh air. So we've got just a little puff of fresh air going into all my bedrooms and my main spaces all the time. That's filtered air, and it's balanced ventilation. So when I bring air in, I'm pushing air out at the same time. I've got a daughter that has asthma, and I really want to make sure that this is a very, very clean air house. I don't want any allergens in the air, and I want to make sure this is very healthy air. And then lastly, I haven't quite worked out all the details yet, but I'm interested in this house being a net zero or a net positive house. And I think this is why I like passive house so much and why it's intrigued me so much, is that if we build to this standard, it's really not going to take a lot of solar on the roof. And I like solar because it's a static system. Once you set it and forget it, there's no moving parts, there's no maintenance really, there's nothing that needs to be done. That if I put enough on, I could be net positive. I could actually give back to Austin Energy and get paid for more energy than I'm even using in the house. I have a feeling we'll have some questions and comments on that, and we're going to get into more of this in the future. But Kit, why don't we go upstairs? We'll talk a little bit about the upstairs design, and then maybe we could pop out onto this real flat roof right above us and talk about a few of the details outside.
That'd be good.
All right, we'll meet you upstairs. Kit, I love this stairwell, man. I think this light in here, once we do some wood walls in here, it's really going to bathe that downstairs in light, and it's such a feature on the house. I live in about a 2,100 square foot house now with our 4 kiddos, and we just have one main living space. There's no secondary space. And as my kids are transitioning into the teen years, we've got kids coming over, we've got friends. There's nowhere to go except for just all in one space. So having this secondary room is going to be incredible for us. Walk me through what's happening upstairs architecturally.
Yeah, so this has become what's been dubbed now as the teen room. So they're sequestered off, they've got their own space. You know, where this all really happened was, that's where the stair was originally. This whole floor plane was chopped up. And then we've added about 12 feet, really it's about right here. And then from over here, this is all new floor that we've extended over the existing roof.
Yep.
Stair was over there, so what that allowed us is to give, big sister the big room. We've got that, rid of the stair.
Yeah, so my daughter's in this larger bedroom.
She has her
own bathroom over here,
Yep.
which is really nice.
Own bathroom, great natural light, plenty of closet space.
Yep.
But that getting rid of that stair helped so much to give us that. And she's got her own world here, away from the boys.
Yeah, it's
and
pretty
so
nice.
now the boys.
So my daughter is my oldest. She's 14, and then I've got 3 boys behind her that are all 2 years apart, and they're all going to be down here in their own bedroom. And as we're going by this space too, this is probably my wife's second favorite space in the house, which is a linen closet, which we don't have in our current spot. So having a spot for linen's amazing. And then this room is my bunk room. So basically I'm hoping that my boys will, for many years until they're out of the house, stay in the same bedroom. I figure you're going to have a roommate your whole life. Might as well not have your own bedroom as a kid, right?
Wow. It is so cool. They're all going to be in here in their own little deal. You can lock them off.
Yep.
They're completely at this side of the house.
Yeah, they almost have a little suite back here in some respects. So we've got one window for each one of their beds, one big closet here, and then there will be a sliding barn door here. And then this room will end up being kind of a secondary bedroom, living space. Maybe if they have friends over for the night, this would be an easy spot to have a second bed. And then we've got now closet 2 and closet 3 as well. So each one of the boys will have their own kind of closet space. I think this is going to be a terrific space.
Oh, yeah.
And then the other space, we don't have a ladder right this second, but if we were to pop upstairs to the attic, man, Kit, I love this attic space. When we transitioned from thinking about remodel to building new, one of the things I said to you was, you know, how could we get a little bit more attic and storage space? In Texas, we don't have basements like I did growing up in the Northeast. All our mechanicals are in our attics, but all of our junk, all of our stuff is in our garages. And with 4 kids and bikes, I got no room for a car. I barely have room for my tools and my equipment. So having an attic space, incredible. We worked with Smith Structural Engineering and Whit Smith. You guys from Austin probably know those guys, been around 30 years. Whit's dad started the company, and Whit's a second-generation engineer. I worked with him to design an LVL truss system for this roof so that we would have this giant open space, plenty of room. I'll have one of my Mitsubishi Zones upstairs to take care of this floor. My Zender fresh air unit will be upstairs as well. But other than that, I've got great storage space up there and plenty of room for future additions of mechanicals or whatever else I might need. I didn't mention this, but my hot water system for the house is going to be heat pump water heater system. I'm going to use an 80-gallon heat pump. We're going to put that in the garage space within the garage to kind of make that part of the conditioned envelope. What else am I missing up here?
I don't know, just the fact, back upstairs to the attic, I mean, we added a window there and just the huge difference.
I forgot about that.
Simple idea. And then, and really,
The
I mean,
gable
you know,
window.
yeah, and back to the framing, I mean, that's kind of old school. I mean, Whit's taken a more modern approach to it, but it's like some of the houses we grew up with.
Yeah.
Simple, you know, we've almost taken for granted we're doing, you know, pre-engineered trusses.
Yeah, it's almost
you know.
like we forget that we don't have to do pre-engineered
Exactly.
trusses.
It's like so, and it makes so much, a huge difference.
Yeah, and those are more certainly than an engineered truss system. But to gain that kind of space for storage, and of course, my envelope is at the roof line, right? So my air conditioning envelope, my air sealed envelope is all the way up to the peak of the roof. So all that storage space up there is within my air conditioned envelope. We'll insulate inside in the rafter space with some traditional bats, but because I've got that 4 inches of rooftop insulation, that space is really going to be temperate and very, very much the same temperature as the rest of the house. Kit, why don't we pop out this window onto this real flat roof over here, and talk about a couple details outside. Yep, I'll meet you out there. All right, guys, we're on the pop out. This is the second story roof, or first story roof, I should say, over my master. These are those windows that are going to feed that light down in here. And now you can see a couple of these details, which is kind of fun. Here's my wall insulation right here. And then here's the 2 layers of rooftop insulation you can see, because we haven't run this yet. These are going to end up being triple glaze JELD-WIN windows, and we left this top foam off for the head flashing and all the other waterproofing that's going on there, but it's kind of fun that you can see all those details. And then the roof got framed on top of that. Now we did a slightly different detail here with these LVLs on the flat, and this overhang's only 16 inches, whereas the rest of the house is 24. But talk to me about the roof that will come on here eventually, Kit.
Well, so what we're talking about, you know, we got this super low pitch, and I know that was a huge concern of yours, but we really wanted to have that just kind of eyebrow flat look when you were looking at it from the street. Yep. And so the solution was, because it's a small roof area, is really just, we think we can get a large enough piece of sheet metal to where we just have a single break right there in the middle to make the ridge. Yep. And that way we're not going to have any penetrations. There's certainly no vents or anything coming through here. So, you know, I think that was the win-win, where we're still getting that really, you know, flat eyebrow thing that was the original concept with this pop-up. So, and
then we'll do a standing seam metal roof on the rest of the roof. And again, I'm standing on the second layer of zip system sheathing, so that really this is just my watershed layer, but the layer below this is my air sealing layer. Let's talk about this gable next. I love this view because now you can see on this gable, this is my second story pop-up over here. That insulation is continuous all the way up to the peak of my roof and basically rolls right onto my roof insulation. So my roof deck is right here, my wall insulation comes up, I've got my 2 layers of roof insulation here. Then we'll put our hardy soffit on here coming down. And then we've started putting our battens on. It's really important when you've got a cladding on the outside of the house to have an air gap behind that cladding. We want that hardy plank in this case that goes up on a batten system. I still have battens to come here to have an air gap behind it so that any water that gets past it, we can just hit that ventilation area and drain right out and not have a problem. We'll put a bug screen at the top and the bottom. That also allows me to take advantage of the foil facing that you're seeing on the outside of this foam. This foil facing is going to act as a radiant barrier. So when the sun hits that hardy and any of those radiant rays that get back there are going to get rejected by this. If this was butted up tight, a radiant barrier would not work. It needs that air gap in front of it. And then this is a great spot to see what else we've got going on here. That wall insulation went on, the roof framing went on top of that, and now you can see all of my overhangs are bolted on after the fact. So these overhangs then get bolted on with a real long power lag from Spax. It gets basically like a lag screw all the way back into the framing. And now my overhang, all this detail of my closed soffit will look like a normal house. Everyone in the neighborhood's house looks similar, but they have traditional vented roofs that are very, very inefficient. And in my case, I've got an air-conditioned attic. All of my Christmas decorations are gonna live within the same AC space as the rest of my house. Because I've got this solid blanket of insulation on the outside with perfect wall style, I don't need to worry about much BTUs from the sun's heat getting through. Very little is gonna make it through. And what little makes it through, I've got a very small mechanical system to cool or to heat in the wintertime. And then I've got that fresh air ventilation system that's balanced to bring in fresh air when I need it. And I've got a separate ultra air dehumidifier that's dehumidifying my house air. So this house is really gonna sip energy. It's not gonna use a whole lot. And this roof right here happens to be facing south and west. Perfect spot for me to do a small solar array to power the house. I'm still working on some of those calculations, so I don't have all that yet, but it's coming soon.
We got a great pitch too.
Yeah.
312.
Yeah, 312, so
optimal.
easy.
Yeah.
Kid, I think that's about it. Anything else you can think of to close this out?
I think we covered it all.
Yeah, we covered a lot.
Yeah, we did.
Guys, thanks for joining me. If you're watching this from the AIA CRAN Committee, Kit and I are going to do a live Q&A afterwards. If you're watching this on YouTube, I really appreciate you guys joining me. I'll put a link to Kit so you'll know his website in the description. Big thanks to Steve Basic, who couldn't be here. Amazing job on the details. So many people have helped me along the way on this. It's been a super fun project. If you're not already a subscriber, hit that subscribe button below. We've got new content every Tuesday and every Friday. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram. Otherwise, we'll see you next time on The Build Show.